You know, even down to a state test. They're telling them they have to take a state test.
Yeah.
You know, these schools were poor performing before COVID. And now they've had a year and a half off, literally, other than we doing online contact with them, and you want to test them. I think it's just injustice.
And then
there's a spectrum.
Yeah, and then during these times, it's added stress, and maybe it's unnecessary stress that we're adding on, because we know that as teachers, we didn't really teach as much. We lost a lot of teaching time, right? So to assess them on the same standards that we expect them to have when we're fully teaching, then it's not fair, and it's only going to give data that's flawed. You know, it's only going to make certain kids feel like they're not capable enough, and others feel like they are.
The justification was, oh, we want to know a diagnosis. That's the way. Do you know that teachers do benchmark assessment? A good teacher knows to do a benchmark assessment. A teacher knows to do a diagnostic assessment. Those are things that we are built with in education. And so now you're mandating us to do an additional one. You're assuming that we're not doing our job. And that your data would reflect anything relevant. We know that kids learn day to day.
Yeah,
they can know a lot of information, and then they go into a test, and the testing environment skews their understanding of things. And we understand that, but people, they talk about ACTs and SATs. They're like, there's so much data and data support that ACTs and STTs have racial biases based off of tone and texture and how the content is presented. Meaning they use words that don't necessarily are not in the vocabulary of our kids, our African-American kids. And they know that. And so that same thing, trust to believe, is happening with state tests. And I have to tell my kids, I'm like, listen, you know this information. It's not that you don't know it. It is presented in a way that's flawed.
I was speaking to a teacher about that on the show not too long ago, because we were talking about the achievement gap, right? And it was talking about how can you have an achievement gap when the data that we're using to assess the gap is based on flawed testing data. So of course you can manipulate that test to make certain groups feel like they're farther behind, or make the gap seem so much wider because your tests are flawed, or there's bias built into the test.